Okay, so here we are in the dashboard that we've created. And really, in order to look at behavioral health equity among some sexual and gender minority youth populations, I feel like a good starting spot might be to look at the broadest data we have, which is some of our community data or our population data. So what we have here is data from CDC's Youth Risk Behavior Survey, which if you're not familiar with, it's conducted every other year, and it samples high school students in San Diego Unified School District. So you can see that we have YRBS data available for multiple populations, and today we're going to focus on our sexual minority youth. And we can actually then begin to explore how this population is faring across multiple indicators. So just to orient you to how the layout of the dashboard works, we'll start with this indicator of seriously considered suicide in the past 12 months by sexual orientation. And this first graph up here shows outcomes for a specific year, and you can change the year over here. And what's really nice is that we've also built in dynamic interpretations for each of the outcomes. So what this says is that in 2019, youth who identified as LGB were significantly more likely to have seriously considered committing suicide in the past year compared to youth who identified as heterosexual or straight. And then we have the associated point estimates and the p-value for the difference between the two groups. It's also nice that on hover over the bar graphs, you can get the point estimate and the 95% confidence interval. And then if you look down here at the bottom graph, you can see how this outcome has changed since 2011 when the data were first collected. And this really helps us monitor trends in inequity issues over time. So the second line of inquiry might be to look more closely then at some of our CYF, our client data, to see if we can't identify inequities in the populations that we're serving. So in investigating our client data, a good place to start is the demographic profiles. And so we've now navigated over to the demographic profiles page. And again, you can see that we have the option to investigate demographic profiles by numerous CYF populations. And we're looking at our sexual and gender minority youth for today's example. And then you can look at it by numerous subpopulations. Again, age, diagnosis, gender, region, and race ethnicity are all options. And what we see here, if we look at the population, the gender distribution is actually quite interesting. If we look at our dynamic description down here, we can see that while 80.4% of youth who identified as LGBTQ were female, only 53.3% of all youth served were female. And that difference is significant. So we're definitely serving more female LGBTQ youth than males. And again, what's nice is if you hover over the bars, you can see on this graph the numerators and the denominators. And of course, client counts can be really important for service planning. And then down along the bottom here, again, we have trends over time. And at the moment, we have 3 years of fiscal data in here. So in addition to demographics, we may want to know how well our sexual and gender minority clients are faring on other indicators. And so to look at this, we've come over to our CYF client outcomes. And this page allows us to investigate differences in equity issues by level of care. So things like emergency service use and inpatient psychiatric treatment, and also outcomes at discharge. So for the youth population, that would include outcomes from our PSC and our CANS data. So just for the purposes of demonstration today, we're looking at our sexual and gender minority youth and their receipt of inpatient psychiatric treatment. And what we see again is that youth who identified as LGBTQ were significantly more likely to have received inpatient psychiatric treatment compared to their peers who did not. And again, we have these data available for 3 fiscal years over time, so you can monitor trends in equity. as a side note, I just wanted to say that these individual pages of the dashboard can be exported for your own reports, and the data can also be downloaded for your own purposes. So there's actually some other pages that allow us to explore equity issues among our client data, and I'm not going to show you all of those today. Suffice it to say, you actually have the ability to look more closely within subpopulations. So for instance, we could see if male and female LGBTQ youth are faring the same, or if there are differences in outcomes by gender. So essentially running three-way crosstabs. So really quickly, we also wanted to demonstrate another feature that we're building into the dashboard, which is the ability to investigate issues of equity spatially. So I've now navigated over to some of our discharge data, specifically our spatial maps. And if you remember, one of the questions that we were interested in exploring today was whether or not there are areas in San Diego County where there are disproportionately higher rates of ED utilization for mental illness. So to investigate this, we're using discharged and mortality data that are compiled by OSHPD and prepared by San Diego County's Community Health Statistics Unit. And so the map that we have here is showing rates by the 41 sub-regional areas in San Diego County, or SRAs. And you can see that these darker spots are indicating higher rates of ED discharge for mental illness. So there's a couple of cool features that I wanted to point out. The first is that if you hover over any of the bars, you can get both the rates and the counts of hospitalization discharge, and you can achieve the same thing if you hover over individual spots on the map. Another cool feature is that you can actually select on the bars to zoom in on different regions, and you can get closer and further out, or even search within these maps to really see at a smaller geographic scale what kind of spaces compile each of these regions. And then another interesting feature is that if you're interested in just one of our 6 HHSA regions, is that you can select that and it will show you where the sub-regional areas are, both on the map and on the plot below that make up those regions. So moving forward, we're actually hoping to build out these maps with a lot more data, a lot of census and social determinant risk data, and for some different geographic scales. But hopefully this has kind of provided a sufficient overview of some of the features that are available in the dashboard, and hopefully some of the ways that you all as users of the dashboard can investigate equity issues. Thank you.